It's time for Operation Freedom with your host, Dr. Dave Janda, on Southeast Michigan's conservative powerhouse, WAAM Talk 1600.
Thanks for tuning in, folks, and welcome back to WAAM Talk 1600's Operating Theater. It's the only OR in all talk radio. I'm Dr. Dave Janda, broadcasting from our ancillary bunker, linked to our main freedom bunker in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor. We're here every Sunday for you live from 2 to 5 Eastern, but it doesn't start and stop on Sundays from 2 to 5. We are available 24/7 at davejanda.com. That's the home for all of our content. It's the most secure place you can go. Our IT team spends tremendous amount of time and effort, led by Nick Ruiz, in making the content available for you. There is a tremendous amount of free content and content for you to network. Because the more people that are educated with the facts, which we present on this platform, much to the deep state's chagrin, the more people that are educated with the facts, the more people that become empowered. The more people that are empowered, the sooner we end this reign of terror, and it is terror, by the deep state. Every week in our operating room, folks, we dissect current events that are impacting you, your family, your business, our community, and our country. And that's why we have that content at davejanda.com, both the free side as well as the subscription side, with the extra shows, the extra content, the extra guests, the more in-depth analysis, the archives to all of our shows. That's why we're there 24/7. The freedom beacon of light and truth is on for you, and it never flickers, and it will never go off. We bring to our operating room information and guests that the bought-off lamestream fake media either ignores because it doesn't fit into their preconceived, politically correct, bought-off agenda, or because, folks, they're petrified. They're petrified of what might happen if they actually tell you what you need to know. This show is about your freedom. Your political, your economic, your financial, and your health care freedom. Before we move to our first guest, I want to talk about another friend of ours, a very dear friend, member of our Freedom family, and has been a regular on this platform for over 10 years, Rob Kirby. As I announced to you several weeks ago, Rob was in significant medical trouble. He had been admitted to an ICU less than a week after he was last on our show on February 20th. Rob continues to fight for his life. And, I practiced medicine for 32 years on the front line of healthcare delivery, and prior to that had another 12 years in working at different levels of the healthcare world. And many times we come in contact with a patient where we say, wow, this person's in very, very deep trouble. And it turns out that person ends up walking out of the hospital. There are also many times that we come in contact with a patient and they might not have such a significant problem, but then something catastrophic occurs. Very early in the process, you realize as a healthcare provider that you are a pawn in the system, that there is a much higher power. And that higher power calls the shots 100% of the time. So I ask you yet again, as I have for the past 4 weeks, I ask that you say a prayer for Rob Kirby. And if you don't pray, then I ask that you send very positive thoughts to Rob as he continues to valiantly fight for his life. He is truly a freedom fighter on many different planes of the highest order. I have been very honored to call him a friend, and he is your friend because he is one of the very few people in life who put your interests ahead of his own. That is how he ran his life. We can all learn a lot from Rob. My next guest is another individual who puts your welfare, your life, ahead of her own. How do we know that? Because it would have been very easy for TraderStef to enjoy her life after, if you will, retirement. To, if you will, not educate and empower people about what's really going on and really save all that information just for herself or her immediate family or immediate friends. No, she puts her life on the line every time she comes on the show or every time she writes one of her very in-depth articles that somehow ends up a big chunk of that content being, I don't know, pilfered by other people like it's their own original work and never give her credit. TraderStef initiated a career spanning 14 years within the New York City investment banking industry. She acquired a diverse skill set in human resourcing, technology and communication, training, education and development, business analysis, and global risk. She began investing in precious metals as far back as 1999. Why? Because, well, she saw what was coming down the line. She left the banking industry, the belly of the beast, in 2009, and that included after 5 years in global risk management at Citicorp. She is a phenomenal author. She has a fantastic website chock full of information that the bought-off lamestream fake media will never touch. But you should. In fact, you not only should touch it, you should devour it. Because if you do, you immediately will become more educated and more empowered. The website is TraderStef, STEF.com. It's my honor to welcome back our friend, TraderStef. Steph, welcome back to the Operation Freedom platform and show.
Hey, Dr. Janda, how are you?
Doing fine.
I'm sorry to hear about Rob Kirby. I loved his work. I pray that he gets out, walks out, and continues on.
As do I. But I do know this, Steph. I truly believe that wherever Rob is headed, I'm sure he will provide a guiding light to all of us and be an inspiration for all of us for many years to come. And speaking of inspiration, you Steph, you continue to produce and write incredible information that is far ahead of the curve. And you most recently you wrote about the growing risk of recession in our financial world, while we're all being distracted by whatever show they want to put on. Educate our listeners about this growing risk of recession, because it's a recession has adverse consequences for, well, all of us, if you will, plebes.
Yeah. So there's a growing risk of recession as the bread and circuses distract the plebeians. And a plebeian, if you don't know out there, Radio Land, was the average citizen, Roman citizen, that are depicted in paintings while they were at the circular Colosseum, filling all the seats and watching games, circuses, murder, and fights to the death by slaves and imprisoned warriors. And the best contemporary movie, in my opinion, that portrays that era is Gladiator from 2000. Definitely pull that up and give that a watch if you have not already. I don't want to spend too much time on the recession. I want to get to the gold and silver, but I do want to say that one of the biggest indicators for recessions in the near term is not the yield curve, which everyone's talking about. What's generally more well-known is consumer sentiment, because consumer consumption accounts for 70% of the country's gross domestic product, which is a compilation of, how big the economy is doing, like what's going on. Well, the GDP has been trending downward since the 1950s, by the way, and right now it's collapsing. ever since the mini recession that was deflationary during the first lockdown from the pandemic when it started in mid-2020. So we're definitely there. And you asked me a question. Well, first, we're experiencing stagflation, obviously. Mm-hmm. And that's when we've got high inflation with a declining GDP. Obviously, that's what's going on. We can't argue with that. But at our last interview, you asked me what I thought the next big surprise was in the financial markets.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You caught me off guard. I wasn't ready to answer that question. I just blurted out. I said, there's going to be another taper with the Fed. Well, Bill Gross, formerly PIMCO's bond king,
mm-hmm.
he was quoted on March 19th in the Financial Times. He said, I suspect you can't get above 2.5 to 3% on interest rates before you crack the economy again. We've gotten used to lower and lower rates, and anything much higher will break the housing market. The central bank will be unable to go ahead or above 2.5 or 3%. So that was my prediction, and, that's where we are, because anything that gets beyond that, we cannot afford, for one, the interest on the national debt, for instance. And as interest rates rise, of course, the housing market will impact everything. So things are kind of a mess, to put it mildly. And we're all being kept busy with bread through potential more stimulus mm-hmm. and circuses like the Ukrainian war.
Mm-hmm.
Very sad state of affairs.
So in times of trouble, at least historically, hard assets such as gold and silver have stood the test of time. Do you believe that's still the case, Steph? And if so, where do you see them going in the near and long term?
Well, the answer is going to be a little bit long-winded, so please bear with me.
Go right ahead. No, it's always insightful.
I penned Gold and Silver in the Fog of War, Part 1 and 2, in February and March, and they were a slam dunk. Despite the wrath from retail plebes or misinformed pundits that recirculate outdated narratives that are riddled with fears of suppression. I get that. But all I see and hear when the price of gold and silver spikes through a formidable resistant level is crickets, if any. Sometimes it's just silence. But when the price action moves higher or too high too fast, and the inevitable throwback, otherwise known as a correction, takes place, for a healthy breather and a consolidation that builds support for the next leg higher, the whining pierces the eyes and the ears. And it continues. It's human nature. But things just don't go straight up. So welcome to the age of high-frequency trading. Algorithms, automated and autonomous trading platforms, and the realm of artificial intelligence that's matured over 30 years in the making. And the machines never sleep. They don't get paid a salary or benefits. They're not influenced by emotions and egos found in financial firms on Wall Street or elsewhere. But they dine on legacy media headlines, social media chatter, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and innumerable combinations of technical analysis triggers. So what we've all kind of thought was, hey, it's like Trading Places. The movie from, 1983, I think?
Yeah, I believe so.
You got all these traders on the floor, and you got the brokers, and you got the financial institutions. Well, imagine that all those people and all those firms are computers now that are automated, and some of them are making decisions autonomously. So 85 to 95% of trading on financial exchanges is now automated. And, I opined extensively about manipulation Trojan horses beginning back in, January 2019 through June 2021. You never hear the end of it, but if you were hoodwinked by dinosaur claims that the futures market are a delivery mechanism, or the amount of physical commodities stored in a silo, or Gold Vault matter to paper futures, or you still believe Toto is going to discover an institutional wizard behind a curtain, consider the Chicago Board of Trade's 1993 educational video. It's linked out at the article at my website. That will educate you on the futures market. So we also talked about it briefly in our interview in June of 2021. It's called the Deja Vu interview. Definitely deja vu, but what happened this time? That's the bottom line, right? What happened on March 8th and 9th? Well, there was a major implosion of the nickel market at the London Metals Exchange. It was all over the headlines. And it just so happens, at the very same time, gold was getting ready to challenge the all-time high after already having made a $400 run. It was pretty explosive. So nickel, here's a quote from a couple articles linked out in the article. Nickel prices spiked 250% in 2 days. And several brokers and brokerage firms that trade on the LME were brought to the brink of failure. And there are signs of mass liquidation across all commodities markets and surging margin calls due to the dramatic price moves in metals and all commodities since Russian troops crossed Ukraine's borders in February, which is blowing everything out of the market. So whether a market sell-off triggers a normal throwback or a correction, or a major crisis creates a large price move, the bear or bull has to resolve itself as each exchange opens that participate in a very complex, interrelated global market and multiple layers of counterparty risk. And if big pockets need a lot of cash in a hurry to cover losses somewhere else, paper gold is one of the most liquid markets on the planet, and it can take a hit. And one standout example of that was the brief sell-off of gold during the Great Financial Crisis. So obviously, there was a lot of chaos around March 8th and 9th, and selling begets selling, buying begets buying, technical levels are triggered, and after that run, it just turns out, here's the good news, the candle that printed on the monthly chart, now keep in mind, when you talk charts, if you're looking at a 1-minute chart, you're looking at the potential of what's going to happen in the next minute. When you're looking at daily, it's the next day. If it's a weekly chart, it's like the next week or a couple weeks. With a monthly, we're looking at least the next month out. Printed a big W since the August 2020 high, which tends to be very bullish. The problem was, or is, the pullback was so severe, you might say, this time, but it didn't break any major technical levels, quite frankly. It's just it's set up now for an even bigger move. If it can just take out that 1980 for more than 24 hours, because that's how long 1980 was taken out before it was challenging the 2075. That's not decisive. That's not left us. So, right, in the process of the pullback, well, here we are. So we got the big W, but we still might revisit 1850 because within the analysis that I put out in February and March, the breakout from a triangle before it rocketed to the all-time high again, that line on top, that top of that triangle, it trends downward as time goes on. So now it's lower than it was in early March. So we could visit 1850. So don't freak out if it does. And remember, we're currently in spring seasonality. And the price action is typically choppy until late spring or early summer. So the gold market chart is still bullish. And scalping intraday spot trades in April is great. But caution is warranted until 1980 is left in the dust before you risk any really large positions on swing trades out into the future. In silver, it's pretty much the same story. They're just different numbers. We got as high as 27 on March 8th. We printed a low of 23.95 in March. It closed on Thursday at 24.77. So, 21.49 was a really big number that we talked about incessantly. it gets a gold star because it's held as good support since August 2020. And the chart's right for sweet spot scalps, but caution is warranted until 29 and 30 are left in the dust.
And let's talk about mining stocks in particular. You've discussed this on your site. Can you educate our listeners as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, remember that the gold miners are a business. Mm-hmm. So they don't always mirror what's happening in gold and silver. More often than not, they do, but they don't have to correlate because as a business, you've got politics to worry about in the country that the mine's in. Mm-hmm. Then you've got all the business expenses and how well the mine is run. Mm-hmm. And everybody thinks their hole in the ground is the best thing since sliced bread, right?
Right.
But the article is the first one I did in 2 years in the mining sector because it's been in a very slow, long-winded correction. So it's called Gold and Silver Mining Stock Poker. And there's one addendum to it, like I put out a couple days later. But there are some mining stocks to consider. I don't want to call them picks, but I think there's 9 of them. There's 8 or 9 of them. And I'll keep track of them over the next year and see what happens. So if you want to go take a look at what those are, please feel free.
And Steph, when you look at the situation that we see developing and has been developing for weeks, months, years, this issue now of we've had Jerome Powell a couple weeks ago in front of Congress say there can be more than one reserve currency. We see indications that, well, Putin is saying, look, you want to buy natural resources from us, you got to pay for it in rubles. And the other day he linked, I believe, 5,000 rubles to a gram of gold, which essentially is linking, in a way, gold to rubles to potential purchases of natural resources such as oil. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, it's going to reverberate through the global economy. And it's going to take a while for it to play out because the situation is fluent, mm-hmm. both on the ground and in the financial market as they're, tit for tats here for sanctions. So actually, when you do the math for the ruble's current price, which has gained all of its losses against the dollar, since they first invaded, they took the hit and now it bounced back. But as of this weekend, it equates to about a $1,940 floor on the price of gold. But remember, it is a global market, and We've got the automation going on. There's a lot of factors here, but the bigger picture, it's really hard to analyze it at this point. The reserve currency issue, it's the petrodollar issue, that hegemony is being blown out of the water. Saudi Arabia is selling their oil to Russia in yuan. There are so many factors here. It's hard to describe it or even predict with any reliable time frame of what's going to happen when. But it definitely portends higher prices in the precious metals.
Steph, educate our listeners in our last minute here. Educate our listeners on how they can follow you, how they can get access to your incredibly insightful articles.
TraderStef.com, and that's spelled with an F at the end. And my Twitter feed is the same moniker, TraderStef. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Steph, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. I thank you for putting people far ahead of the curve with your very, very valuable insight. Folks, you're listening to Operation Freedom. I'm Dr. Dave Janda, broadcasting from our ancillary bunker linked to our main freedom bunker in the People's Republic of Antarctica.